Welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. We're officially 10 days away from the 2022 NBA draft. And while the Grizzlies can go in many different directions, one thing to know a bit more about is what about the Grizzlies' current options that they have on their roster when it comes to their front court? How could their long-term views play into what the Grizzlies might do in the 2022 draft? Looking at Santi Aldama, Xavier Tillman, and Killian Tillie on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go. Right now.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome one and all to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman, flying solo with you today. My co-host Michael Cole will be back with me once again later on this week. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having an outstanding start to your week. Of course, you can find myself at StatsSAC, DeMichael Cole at DeMichael C on Twitter, the show at Locked On Grizz, and right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. Lets us know you enjoyed the show and lets others be able to find the show to get the best when it comes to Grizzlies content. You could also find the show free on all podcast platforms. Just make sure you hit the subscribe button there as well to get the latest content when it's available. Shawn Coleman again, been covering the Grizzlies now for 4 years, credentialed media member with the Grizzlies, your co-host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. And while you can bet that the Grizzlies are looking once again to find a few hits in the draft, I can bet you also want to know the best place to go when it comes to you betting and wagering on sports. Well, the fastest and easiest way for you to do that is through betonline.net. Our title sponsor for today's show, make sure you check it out at betonline.net. So last week, me and DeMichael went into discussion about different names that the Grizzlies could look to bring on board to the Memphis roster through whatever focus they have when it comes to the 2022 NBA draft. And the crazy thing about it is this, is that as the Grizzlies have less needs now, with their team being so young, so deep, and having so much quality talent, coming off a year in which they had the second best record in the NBA, the crazy thing is that with less needs, it actually makes it to where it seems the Grizzlies could go a variety of different avenues. Now that they have less, needs on the surface, it actually makes it to where they can go more directions, it seems, than they did in the past. They're no longer really looking, just to add any type of talent. Though in the draft, you probably want to try to add the best player possible. You want to go upside. I typically agree that's the best way to go. But the Grizzlies probably are a bit more tactical when it comes to what moves they can make. But the other thing to consider is this. What about the moves that they've already made? Where do the statuses of several young players on the Grizzlies roster already, how do they matter in terms of what the Grizzlies might do in 10 days? Well, in the front court, I think that is certainly worth the discussion to have. Because as of right now, while it may seem like the Grizzlies front court may not have many minutes to give up, why would the Grizzlies add another front court talent when they actually have 6 right now front court players that they could have a pecking order already in place? Why would the Grizzlies look to add another front court talent even if they think it's worthwhile in this draft? Well, once again, the reason why is because a year from now, this situation could be completely different. As of right now, we know Jaren Jackson Jr. is here for at least the next 4 years. The Grizzlies committed a 4-year, $105 million deal with him last October. That is going to be put in place next season. But beyond that, the certainty that you have, it becomes a lot less as you go in time. Yes, you have Steven Adams on the roster. Yes, you have Brandon Clark on the roster. But a year from now, Steven Adams is an unrestricted free agent. Brandon Clark, a restricted free agent. Hopefully, the Grizzlies get a deal done with at least one of them to keep them around longer. You watch the show enough, you know my feelings on signing Brandon Clark long term. But at the very least, as of right now, a year from now, things could look completely different if those two players are still left unsigned long term. Then, yes, you will beyond next year have Xavier Tillman as well as Santi Aldama under contract. But what about those players in terms of their 2021-2022 seasons? Do the Grizzlies feel that one of those two type of players can step into a rotation spot for a team by 2 years from now that clearly is going to be gunning for a championship? That certainly is a question that remains to be seen. And then, of course, you've got Killian Tillie, who's got 1 year left on his contract. So the point that I'm getting at is that while the Grizzlies do have several intriguing talents in their front court, while they're likely going to keep Brandon Clark probably at least, or, one of Steven Adams and Brandon Clark beyond this year more than likely, and they do have Xavier Tillman and Santi Aldama signed for multiple years, there's still plenty of question marks that, in my opinion, make it to where if the Grizzlies feel that a front court talent that's available to them in the draft is the best route for them to go, there still is enough reason to go with that front court talent if they feel questions remain about their young front court depth currently on the roster. We've talked plenty about Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams, and Brandon Clark. But what about the other three players that I named? Killian Tillie, Xavier Tillman, and Santi Aldama. Let's start with Killian Tillie. And the reason why I start with him is because there's not really much to speak of when it comes to Killian Tillie, because unfortunately, the same thing that did not allow for him to be drafted in the 2020 draft came up this year once again. It hit him at the beginning of his rookie year, the 2020-2021 season, and it hit him towards the end of last year. Injury proneness, if that's a word, Killian Tillie's injury-prone history has not allowed for him really to continue developing the NBA, much like it impacted him in college. Yes, with Killian Tillie, you have an intriguing blend of a player who can, be at least passable on defense, but also a very good three-point shooter as he was in college. But the thing is that the three-point shooting so far for Killian Tillie has not translated to the NBA. So far, Killian Tillie in his NBA career is 37 of 119 from beyond the arc, good for 31.1%. While Killian Tillie does average 1.2 blocks per 30 minutes and 1.8 steals, there is some turnover-causing activity for him on defense. He definitely is someone that can make plays on defense. You have to wonder where the offense is going to come into play. There's not a lot of playmaking. There's not, a high level of rebounding. Though he makes plays on defense, what really keeps Killian Tillie on the court when it comes to his offensive game? The hope for him coming out of college was his ability to shoot the three as a big, and it just is not translated yet in the NBA. The Grizzlies saw enough to keep Killian Tillie on another 1 year contract, but likely you're going to see Killian Tillie once again at the end of the bench when it comes to his ability to be able to get minutes on the court. He may step into a few minutes, but kind of like John Conchar on the wing. When John Conchar plays, it's usually because of injuries to other players who are higher in the pecking order. That is going to be Killian Tillie's role next year on the roster. Yes, there's going to be more minutes available in some way, shape, or form, whether it's free agents leaving or a consolidation trade. You're likely going to see minutes available for Killian Tillie, but on a 1 year deal, Tillie may prove that he could be a long-term deep reserve option for the Grizzlies. But at the age of 24, and the fact that the shot has not translated as of yet, I just don't know if there's going to be enough opportunity for Killian Tillie to really show he could be a future significant part of the Grizzlies rotation past the point that he already is. He may get a bit more run next year when it comes to other players being out for injury, but when it comes to Killian Tillie's game translating so far in the NBA, it's still a work in progress. And at the age of 24, you have to wonder if the shot does not start falling next season, where will Killian Tillie find other value to be able to be a rotation piece somewhere in the NBA? And if that shot does not start falling, it's hard to find it in Memphis. That's going to be the consistent thing throughout this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. The key to this, in my opinion, is that Taylor Jenkins wants as many options shooting as possible on the court. Now, you may bring up Steven Adams and Brandon Clark as non-shooting options that get a lot of minutes. But the thing is, none of these three players, at least not yet consistently in their careers, are showing the ability to get offensive rebounds, to play excellent defense, to be a difference maker on the run. None of these players that I'm going to mention are going to have shown the ability that Steven Adams and Brandon Clark have shown to add value to make up for the fact that they're not shooters in Taylor Jenkins' offense. Can a Killian Tillie or a Tillman or a Aldama in time show that value? Sure. But when it comes to Killian Tillie, is he going to be able to stay healthy enough? And is he going to get a big opportunity enough to show it next year? I'm going to doubt that that's going to be the case, but at the very least, he is still an intriguing option with his overall shooting profile as a big, where if he does get an extended run for whatever reason it may be, the talent is certainly there. Can the health remain and can the shot consistency show up? That's going to be the big thing to watch with Killian Tillie. But the other player that I think is going to really be interesting to see how his role evolves as time goes on and the Grizzlies potentially lose players to free agency or make consolidation trades is Xavier Tillman. Xavier Tillman took a step back in terms of productivity and his minutes last year. Could that be a needed step back to take 2 or 3 steps forward next season? We'll discuss in just a moment. But before we do, I want to talk with you about the title sponsor of our show, and that's betonline.net. Listen, when it comes to you betting and wagering on sports, I know what you're concerned with. You want to make that part of the equation, making the part of setting up your wagers and bets as easy as possible. And there's no place better to go than betonline.net. Number one, you can bet on whatever you want to. College baseball. Oh, no. Can't believe the Vols lost. College baseball, Major League Baseball, the NBA Finals, boxing, UFC, what have you. There's no better place to go to bet and wager than betonline.net because it takes care of the setup of the wagering and betting for you to make you have an easier time focusing on what you need to focus on, and that's the data to back up your bets. Make sure you go to betonline.net either on your mobile device or your laptop and check out betonline.net today. Of course, we want to remind you again that the NBA draft is 10 days away and the ultimate mock draft starts June 19th. With over 50 insiders, nothing equals the ultimate NBA mock draft and Locked On NBA Big Board Draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. Of course, we're going to have plenty of NBA draft coverage for you here between myself and Michael Cole leading up to the 2022 NBA draft. While the Grizzlies don't have a lottery pick this year, they have plenty of potential options they can look at with 2 first-round picks. Make sure you check out the Locked On NBA podcast as your first listen of the day. So we discussed Killian Tillie, who, in my opinion, probably, yes, he has a spot on the roster next year with his contract, but he's not someone, in my opinion, that really factors into a decision the Grizzlies make when it comes to the draft or adding potential pieces now. In my opinion, the Grizzlies are not thinking to themselves, oh, well, we don't really need to make this move because we still want to see what Killian Tillie can offer us. I still think they want to see that. But I just don't think that the outlook for Killian Tillie is anything that's going to play into the Grizzlies. Really, it's not going to prevent them from making a move to find an upgrade for his potential roster spot if they see fit, which brings an intriguing name into mind. And his name is Xavier Tillman. Now, a year ago, it was kind of amazing to see how good Xavier Tillman had made an impact as a rookie. He basically took Brandon Clark's spot in the rotation, both at the end of the season and during the playoffs. A rookie who didn't really do anything spectacular, but 2 things that he did do that really made him earn the trust of Taylor Jenkins. He consistently made positive plays on the court by limiting mistakes and making smart plays. And Xavier Tillman also showed a better than advertised ability to shoot from the field. During his rookie season, Xavier Tillman, especially from corner threes, if you go back to the playing game against Golden State, hitting that big corner 3 in overtime, showing that he had the prowess to be a shooting threat. 34% from 3 on 65 attempts. And Xavier Tillman, coming into the NBA, he was highlighted as a heady player who consistently made positive plays, whether it be his passing, his defense, his rebounding. That all was as advertised when it came to Xavier Tillman. Not someone with a very high ceiling, but with a consistent floor that could add value. Well, the thing is, though, is that at the end of the day, the play coming into this season, it was very much a matchup of who was going to emerge as the trustworthy third big for the Grizzlies behind Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr.? Was it going to be Xavier Tillman and his consistency when it came to positive value, or was it going to be Brandon Clark's ceiling shining through like it did during Brandon Clark's rookie season? And it was Brandon Clark's ceiling that shined through. As a result, Xavier Tillman found himself out of the rotation for much of the season. And it's nothing against Xavier Tillman's play. It's just that with the breakout season of Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams being better than advertised, coming off a down year in New Orleans, really, really rebounding this season, both literally and figuratively in Memphis. You had Kyle Anderson playing the foursome. The Grizzlies gave a preference, it seemed, to Killian Tillie earlier in the year when it came to potential minutes. Not saying he necessarily played over Xavier Tillman, but they did give a preference to see Killian Tillie as well as Tillman early in the season. And then also as the season went along, Santi Aldama got some run as well. Basically, the Grizzlies knew what they had in Xavier Tillman, and it played the role that it needed to play during Tillman's rookie year. But as players with higher upside started to deliver on that upside this past season, that's where Xavier Tillman's limitations came into play. He just does not have as high of a ceiling as others, whether it be due to his physical limitations, whether it be to the fact that he's not really necessarily an outside threat. The shot itself was not as effective this past season, though that could have been, the fact that, the consistency of playing time wasn't there. But Xavier Tillman showed that while he showed great things during his rookie season, the fact just came down to the Grizzlies went with the higher ceiling options because those players were delivering to their ceilings frequently, and that's what put players higher in the pecking order than Xavier Tillman. However, the value of Tillman showed when it needed to show, and that was in the playoff series against Minnesota when basically Steven Adams was played off the court in game one. Xavier Tillman stepped up and stood out in game two, being a difference maker in terms of limiting Karl-Anthony Towns enough, not being as much of a liability on the outside as a big against smaller players in the NBA. Xavier Tillman has shown both seasons in the NBA he can do just fine on the perimeter on an island against guards and wings when it comes to his ability to not be exposed. So when Xavier Tillman's number was called this past season, he stepped up and delivered. However, I do think that he was a bit overexposed. I do feel that it was shown Xavier Tillman is not a starter. He barely is a talent that you have in your rotation if you are a championship caliber team. If you are a team that has championship aspirations, I don't think that Xavier Tillman is someone that you start with confidence. I think Xavier Tillman may be someone that cracks the rotation as the 8th or 9th guy. And even then, it becomes a question. Xavier Tillman is a fine talent, especially if he is shooting the three like he did his rookie season. But even if not, Xavier Tillman's defense, the consistency of making smart plays, limiting mistakes, his playmaking ability, and overall his ability to do some work in the paint, whether it be blocks, finishing, rebounds, there's enough value there for Xavier Tillman to be the first big off the bench if you lose a guy to injury in the rotation. I don't think that Xavier Tillman for the Grizzlies is either the long-term answer at center to support Jaren Jackson Jr., and he may not even be the best option long-term as a third big. He could be. He could be in time. There's still plenty of time. He's still at 23 years old. He's young enough to certainly continue. Is young enough and has enough talent to continue to develop. But I don't think that Xavier Tillman, though there are 2 years left on his contract, I don't necessarily think he's someone you're not looking at the Brandon Clark situation and saying to yourself, well, we've got Xavier Tillman, so it may not be as big of a need for us to sign Brandon Clark. You still sign Brandon Clark long-term for what he showed in his rookie and third year in the NBA, and then be glad that you also have Xavier Tillman as an insurance policy if Clark or Jaren Jackson Jr. were to go down. So we're not to the point yet that Xavier Tillman has really locked himself into being a rotation member of future Grizzlies teams. We're at the point now to where Xavier Tillman has shown he can add value when he's needed for extended minutes, but also has shown that he may not have as high of a ceiling as other members of this roster. And so this third season, in terms of at least his future with the Grizzlies, I think is a make or break season for Xavier Tillman. Do the Grizzlies feel comfortable enough with him to where if they potentially send out Steven Adams in a trade, then Xavier Tillman becomes the third big to come in and support Jaren and Brandon Clark when they need minutes or when one of those two players are injured? Do the Grizzlies feel that Xavier Tillman has shown enough to go into a season after they were the second best team in the NBA and be the third big on the roster? I can't say with certainty it makes sense for them to do that, but if Xavier Tillman finds himself in that situation, that's the exact opportunity he needs to once again show his value. Xavier Tillman is a consummate professional. He is the type of player who can carve out a 10 to 12-year career or perhaps even beyond as a backup big in the NBA. I don't ever think he's a consistent starter in the NBA because I think he's overexposed, playing more than 20 minutes probably in an NBA game. But he has shown enough ability in his first 2 seasons in the NBA. Plus, has shown the ability to where he can shoot a bit, he can pass a bit. There's enough areas of Xavier Tillman's game to add value that I think he does have a spot on this Grizzlies team at least next year. But I do think that he's going to have to really improve his overall efficiency rates to have a long-term spot for the Grizzlies. Could it happen? Yes, there's 2 more seasons to figure it out. But I do think that Xavier Tillman may not have as bright of a future now as he did a year ago, because higher ceiling players showed out in the minutes that they got. And here's the thing that stands out about next season. While Xavier Tillman may have a bit of more of an opportunity next year, there's also going to be another player on the roster who I think has a higher ceiling who could steal the show if he takes advantage of playing to that ceiling. And that is the Grizzlies' second first-round pick last year, Santi Aldama, who I think is one of the more intriguing talents to watch through this summer going into next year. We'll discuss him in just a moment. But before we do, one of the things that I can tell you is while the Grizzlies may still have some players that they're not certain about, I can tell you with certainty that there is an option for you if you're someone who's tired of those. You go and you look online for a subscription. You want to get a free trial to get an idea of what you're looking at. What is the value of the thing being offered to you? But then all of a sudden, those free trials can become subscription notices. And before you know it, you're paying money for something that you don't need. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 a month with Truebill. Truebill has over 2 million users and helps save them over $100 million. Like Matthew B., who says, in a matter of seconds, I saved $650 for the year on my DirecTV bill, saved $120 for the year on my Sirius XM bill, saved $840 a year on car insurance due to using Truebill. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now, Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands a year. Again, thanks so much for tuning in to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. We're going to have more prospect profiles for you. It's the last full week. This week, we're likely going to see an NBA champion crowned. But for those of us who are cheering for teams who are not playing right now, that also means that the offseason, a week from now, the offseason could be in full swing, and it doesn't stop at all as the NBA draft is now 10 days away. Stick here with Locked On Grizzlies. We'll have the latest for you when it comes to Memphis. So, again, there are many intriguing storylines when it comes to the Grizzlies this season. Can Jaren Jackson Jr. get offensive consistency with his game? What is next for Zaire Williams? What will the long-term situations look like for Brandon Clark, Dylan Brooks, and Steven Adams? And is that going to be in Memphis? Will the Grizzlies sign Tyus Jones, Kyle Anderson, or both long-term? But one of the more intriguing storylines that I think may not be talked about necessarily is Zaire Williams is getting all the focus and the attention from the 2021 draft, as he should. That's how much potential he has, especially in the Grizzlies development track. But in the other player who was picked in last year's first round, the 2021 first round, was Santi Aldama. And if you've listened to Locked On Grizzlies for a while now, I can tell you this. Was not enamored with the pick for Santi Aldama. I'm still not enamored with Santi Aldama himself. I think that there is a high upside with Santi Aldama, but is there going to ever be the consistency that you need to see that? Far too early to say there's not. I just have my doubts as of right now. However, in the minutes that Santi Aldama got during his rookie season, he did flash enough of his upside to where he should remain an intriguing option. Of all the players, of the 3 players that I mentioned on this podcast, Santi Aldama stands out as being the one that the Grizzlies should give the biggest chance to make something of a long-term future with Grizzlies, to make it to where he is a piece the Grizzlies want to be a part of their future rosters. Now, age-wise, it makes sense. He's 21. Tillman's 23. Killian Tilly's 24, and obviously where they were picked. Santi Aldama was picked in the first round, while Tillman was a 35th overall pick, and Killian Tillie was a undrafted free agent. So the Grizzlies do have more invested in Santi Aldama in terms of the draft pick that they made. But while there wasn't some type of breakout flashes, or there wasn't a big impact to the level that Desmond Bain or Xavier Tillman made their rookie seasons, or Zaire Williams made his rookie year, there just wasn't that much opportunity. But in the opportunity that he got, in the opportunity that Santi Aldama got, there were some impressive production rates when it came to his overall play. The one thing that stood out to me, we know Santi Aldama coming into the NBA, what stood out, what made him very, very attractive for the Grizzlies to make the pick that they did, was his all-around game for his size, playmaking, rebounding, blocking, what have you, and it showed. Per 36 minutes, Santi Aldama averaged nearly 9 rebounds per 36 minutes, averaged a block per 36 minutes, showed some pretty good playmaking ability as well for a guy his size. Overall, he had, for Santi Aldama last season, he had 21 assists to 16 turnovers. So some decent decision-making as well. Just all around, very impressive play from Santi Aldama when he got the opportunity. Now, on the flip side, there wasn't as much offensive value as one may have liked. 6 of 48 from 3. Again, back to Killian Tilly. When it comes to a big, long-term playing in Taylor Jenkins' system, one of the things that stands out to me is his ability there to shoot. And if that ability is not there, is he going to be able to add value in other areas to overcome that inability to shoot? Brandon Clark has shown that he can. While Santi Aldama has not really got the opportunity to show that he can as of yet, there at least is intrigue there. There's the rebounding ability. There's enough awareness of knowing how to use his size on defense to where I do think that Santi Aldama could be somewhat of a rim protector. But on offense, even though the numbers were not that impressive, there is some layers to Santi Aldama's game that you typically don't see from a deep in the rotation big. One of the things that really stood out is there is a dribble drive game in Santi Aldama's, bag, assortment, arsenal of talents offensively. There is a dribble drive game that you typically don't see from a guy his size. He developed it, and this is probably one of the parts of his game that intrigued the Grizzlies the most. He developed it during his time in college. If you want the best example, go back to the reverse dunk, one of the most memorable plays of the season for a Grizzlies youngster against Phoenix late in the season. There's a dribble drive aspect to Santi Aldama's game that can allow for him to get downhill and either finish at the rim, where he made nearly 69% of his shots at the rim this past season, or he can show off his playmaking by, as the defense is attracted to him, he can then dish it off to another shooter waiting for what should be a high percentage shot. But even though Santi Aldama was only 6 for 48 from 3 this past season, he was 4 of 12 from the corner. And that's the other big thing that stands out to me. When we talk about Killian Tilly, when we talk about Xavier Tillman, when we talk about Santi Aldama, their abilities to hit threes, but especially those corner threes, is what's really going to determine a pecking order between these 3 next season. Because we know from watching the Grizzlies enough through 3 seasons of Taylor Jenkins at the helm, Taylor Jenkins likes to have that front court outlet in the corner shooting threes, whether it's the small forward like Kyle Anderson or Zaire Williams, whether it's a guard like DeAnthony Melton, who lit it up from the corner last year. But we've also seen Xavier Tillman excel in that corner 3 role from his rookie season. Santi Aldama, if he were to open up another part of his game, it would be the ability to hit the corner 3. And then if he starts doing that on a consistent basis, now you've added another layer to his offense that Taylor Jenkins favors. And that, in my opinion, is how you really open up rotation minutes for Santi Aldama. Is the talent there for him to be able to do that? I do think so. Does that necessarily mean he's going to be a guy that gets 10 to 15 minutes next year as potentially the fourth big off the bench? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that type of upside is there, especially if he can start hitting his shots. So the all-around game of Santi Aldama still certainly adds intrigue. I'm not saying I feel highly confident he ever becomes a significant role player for the Grizzlies as the future unfolds and this team hopefully becomes a championship contender. But I am saying that if the Grizzlies want to give him 10 to 15 minutes a night next year is maybe the fourth or fifth big, and do I feel that Santi Aldama should be a preference over a Killian Tillie or an Xavier Tillman next year? I feel comfortable saying that. However, though Santi Aldama is definitely intriguing, I don't say that if the Grizzlies were to look and move up the draft board, and if a Jalen Duren or a Mark Williams or an E.J. Liddell were to be there as the best value for the Grizzlies, Santi Aldama being on the roster, should that prevent the Grizzlies from going with that type of talent? I don't think so. Because at the very least, you then have another player to come in, and then you've got, competition as to who will emerge in the pecking order between two young front court talents. So the overall point that I make when it comes to Killian Tillie, Xavier Tillman, and Santi Aldama is this. You've got some intriguing options. Between those three, what I think long-term is going to eventually determine which, and I think only one of these three really have a long-term future with Memphis, but which one of these three forms a consistent shot that Taylor Jenkins can find trust in. I think that determines the pecking order between Tillie, Tillman, and Aldama. I also do not think that the presence of any of these three really prevents the Grizzlies from going to get another young big man if it makes sense. If the Grizzlies find another talented big who really complements Brandon and Jaren long-term, I don't think the presence of a Tillie, Tillman, or Aldama should prevent the Grizzlies from adding that young talent to the equation. But if the Grizzlies don't, they still have enough young talent in the front court, these three bigs I mentioned, to give them an opportunity next year, especially when it comes to Santi Aldama. If Aldama were to form a consistent shot from deep, now you've got me intrigued. Now you've got me feeling, okay, there's something to work with there that the Grizzlies should continue to invest effort in long term. But if none of these three were to really form that shot, nor they were to really significantly progress in other areas of their game, the Grizzlies may find that there are some questions starting to form for their future front court starting a year from now, and the Grizzlies may want to start to answer that now if they potentially find a good value in this draft. So there's a lot of intrigue in the young bigs already on the Grizzlies roster. However, I don't think that prevents them from adding another young big in this draft if they feel the value is there. Thanks so much for joining us here for this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Coming up the rest of this week, Michael Cole will be back with me later on this week, and we'll have plenty more insight on potential prospects the Grizzlies could look at. My name's Shawn Coleman. Find me at StatsSAC on Twitter and the show at Locked On Grizzlies, and right here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.